Hey, good morning, River family. It is so good to see you. We have been talking about legacy for the past couple of weeks. If you remember, Pastor Oz and Jane talked about the legacy past, the building blocks, and the people and the things that have happened to get us where we are. Last week, Isaiah did a great job talking about legacy present, because the reality is we're all operating in a form of legacy, whether it's the legacy that built us where we are right now, or the legacy that we are preparing and stewarding for the next generation. So this week, we get to talk about legacy future. And really, when you think about legacy, I think that that's what most people are thinking about. They're thinking about the legacy that they're going to build, or the legacy that they're going to leave. Is kind of like that idea that most people hear. And so I want to take a second and talk about what I think are two different ways of looking at the world. We've adopted this way of looking at the world that is super modern. Yes. And the way that the Bible projects us looking at the world is pretty different. And so I want to talk to you about an 80-year memory versus a 1,000-year memory. This idea that, like, if I went to your kids, or even maybe you, and asked you about your great-grandparents, maybe you know their name. You know, maybe you know what country they came from.
I know one of them.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm not sure that I know any of my I know one. I think I know one of my great-grandparents, like, monikers. Not his name, but, like, what everybody called him.
Right.
It's one of those things where it's like, we don't really know anything about our family lineage or where we came from or all this. But you know what's crazy is the Bible's full of it.
Right. And there's a focus on knowing not just where you came from.
Yeah.
And because there is some pushback, right? There is the online site, the
Yeah.
you and me, the 23, whatever,
Yeah.
DNA testing stuff. People are interested in that, and they think it's really cool to learn that kind of stuff, and it is. But it's not just about like a fun thing to do or interesting or like, oh, look at this, it turns out we're actually German or whatever it is. But legacy and being invested in something where your memory is longer than just the family you've known while you're alive, and then your kids who you hope to know most of their life, and maybe meet some grandkids, and then that's it, right? And that's the 80-year memory. This 1,000-year memory in the Bible, like it has genealogies, not just because it's nice to read a bunch of names in a row.
Because it's not nice.
It is
like, if we're being real, like, if you're reading numbers and you don't understand the point of it, there's nothing more boring.
It's literally a lot of numbers.
Yeah.
It's how many were here, how many were here, how many were here, how many of this name, this name, this name. It's like, why does it matter? Well, it matters because it was the foundation of the nation of Israel.
Yeah.
And God wanted it to be important to Israel to know where they came from.
Yeah.
Who started all this?
Yeah.
It was God, but like who started this here on earth and walked in the legacy that God set up for them, because he wanted them to be his chosen people.
Yeah.
So they already had a calling, a purpose, and a goal.
Yeah.
And so these were the original people who did it, and we need to remember who we came from, and they can link it back to that. And so that memory is an important part of being invested in the future, because if I'm only thinking about my kids and maybe my grandkids, and then like, well, I'm dead, so who cares? Right? Like that's not investing in a true legacy. That's just in my family.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about having, okay, what's 1,000 years from now?
Yeah.
When they look back, like what are the things that we can set up to be, purposeful and intentional about investing in legacy?
That's so good. I want you to just think about for a second the vision of the River Church, and that's to build healthy families that build healthy families. And we talk about that all the time on purpose.
Yes.
And it's important to understand what we mean by building families, because if we're honest, the families that we're building today are super different than the ones that were being built in the Bible.
Yes. Very
And not in their beliefs, right? We all believe in Jesus, but in their culture. And I think that that's important, because the framework of the Bible is the culture that they came from.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that it's only applicable to that time. It just means that there's a belief system that these values and that these ideas are going to be important to you when you're reading it. And so when we think about the Western family, if you talk to a family, a father and mother that are doing a really great job, really intentional parents right now, oftentimes what you will hear is that their goal is to empower their kids to get everything that they need so that they can be launched out in the world and become everything that God's called them to be.
Yes.
And that's a really cool, really well-balanced parenting idea. But it's important that you understand that that is almost oppositional to the biblical family model.
Because it is focused on individual, which is, again, our culture.
Yeah.
what can you accomplish? What do you feel called to? What business, what schooling, what are you going to go after? I'll support you. Like that.
Yeah.
We see that as being a really good parent, and that's not being a bad parent.
Yeah.
But there is a different way to parent in legacy.
Yeah.
And looking at the future.
100%. I think it's super interesting that over and over again, God calls us either sons or part of the army or literally a hand or a foot. Like the idea that these things cannot operate in and of themselves.
Right.
And this biblical model for family is about a vision that God has given the family to accomplish. I mean, just think about the fact that David had a dream, a vision to build a temple for God.
Right.
And never got to even see it completed. That Moses had a dream and a vision from God and never got to see the promised land.
Yeah.
Like over and over again, we get to see in the Bible these ideas of these families, these patriarchs or matriarchs, these leaders who had a vision from God about what their family was supposed to do or be or accomplish. And most of them didn't even get to see them take place. And it's the crazy thing is that the way that we view family, this like modern view of family, is only 50 to 100 years old. It's not like we've been doing this since the Bible ended.
Right. It's fairly recent because we've set up. It's as old as America, I think. But,
Yeah.
This new view of like this is what we invest in. When they first came here, they were still doing that because you had a homestead. You were investing in land that now you owned, and that provided for your family, and then your family's family, and that family's family. Like you didn't move, you didn't go anywhere because this was how you survived.
But even think about the family names in America that we remember, whether it's the Rockefellers or the Kennedys, or these families that were really intentional about the legacy that they as a family wanted to create.
Right.
That we're doing something that's more than just about me. Dad.
Yeah.
Like I'm setting my kids up because I have a vision and a dream about who they're going to be.
Right.
Now, there's something that's really important about this that we understand, and that the vision has to come from God.
Yeah, we're not asking parents to figure out what's it going to look like in 1,000 years.
Yeah,
it's not up to us.
or even to decide what their kids are supposed to do with their lives.
Right, that's not.
Because that's up to God too, right?
And that's why the family business thing is like that's not actually a good model.
Yeah.
In the short term, if you're trying to force your kids into an inheritance, that's not doing legacy well either.
That's right.
It's not like okay, you have to do this, and this is what
Yeah.
I decided that you're going to do.
That's right. This is about hearing from the Lord what my family is called to do, communicating that vision to my family, and giving them the opportunity to buy in to the dream that God has given us. There's a really cool story that I've heard about a family who had a 13-year-old daughter,
Okay.
who all of a sudden, they were going through the house, cleaning the house, and they found drugs in her room, which I think for most parents is a pretty devastating thing to find.
Not what you want to find.
And they believed that it probably had a lot to do with the new boyfriend that she'd gotten at the time. And this father was just devastated, had no idea how to fix the problem, because what's the truth? If you attack what's happening, you're going to drive a wedge between you and your family and not get where you're trying to go, right?
Right.
Attacking the problem is oftentimes the wrong answer.
Right.
Because love and relationship are God's answers. And so he's spending some time talking to the Lord, and one of this father's friends says, hey, I think your daughter's living the wrong story. Which is a really weird verbiage. Living the wrong story, what does that mean? And then he said, I think she needs a new one. And so this man goes to sleep, and while he's sleeping, he has a dream. He wakes up, and he looks into this dream, and he finds this orphanage that needs $25,000 to stay open. So he decides to go back to his family and say, hey, we are going to spend this next year and raise $25,000 for this orphanage. Now, just like every other 13-year-old girl on the planet, she heard that and was fully uninterested, right? Because that's just the way that it is. But in communicating the vision and pushing for it and creating opportunities for buy-in, over that next year, that family raised $25,000 for the orphanage, and a lot of these other things started to change in her life because the family vision was communicated. What am I saying? What I'm not saying is that the answer to your family problems is hearing a vision from the Lord and communicating it. But what I'm saying is if you don't have a vision from the Lord and you're not communicating it, then your family has no direction.
Right, and then you are just trying to do the best you can, whatever the circumstances come. You're not actively going somewhere, you're just choosing the best option as things come up, and that's not how we're meant to experience life, because God purposed for us to be part of something much bigger than ourselves.
100%.
And the Bible is there partially to set that up for us. Like, here's the foundation of a story. that story didn't just end with Revelation, and that Jesus is
Yeah.
still here, Holy Spirit's still here. So we have an opportunity to continue to be part of the story of God's love for people. And being part of that means knowing what part you're in. Because if you just say, okay, we're gonna, I'm gonna save an orphanage, right? That sounds great. And it's like, well, no, that's not necessarily what you're being called to.
That's right.
So you have to be in relationship with God in order to do this well and invest in the future. And it might change.
That's right.
Like that was a temporary vision.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's not a long-term
when
vision.
when after that year, then what? It's not like, well, then God has nothing for your family to do. You
Yes.
accomplished it. Good job. Have a nice life and retire. Right? Like there is no retirement in the story. There is no
Yeah.
retirement in legacy.
Yeah.
And it's all about investing in what God has for you.
So why do we constantly talk about building healthy families? Because that's the vision that the Lord's given us as a church. And the reason that we're talking about it all the time is twofold. One, we want you to know what it is so that you can hear it and take it back to the Lord and buy into it if that's what God calls you to do. The other reason is that we want you to learn how to hear a vision from the Lord and communicate it for your family.
Yeah.
Because the reality is if you just buy into this vision and don't create one for your family, then your legacy stops with you.
Yeah.
Instead of you establishing building blocks today that will build the family of the future, it stops with you. And we want you, as we have for this church, to have 1,000-year vision. We're not stopping until the Lord tells us to stop, and so we're going to be intentional about heading in the direction of what God's called us to do even now.